on this channel, I've talked a lot about all the things I value in my favorite pieces of entertainment. Nuanced writing, complex characters, and generally stories that seek to tell serious and gripping narratives. That being said, I do enjoy a good popcorn blockbuster, which is why, even though I didn't care much for the first Avatar, I was still willing to give Avatar 2 a chance over any modern Marvel movie or TV show that usually can't go 5 minutes without telling cringe, self-deprecating humor, on top of all the other writing issues. Well, my best friend and I watched it together in the theater, and despite enjoying it over what I've endured from Disney and Amazon this past year, I have to say that Avatar 2 falls short in most of the criteria that makes a good blockbuster, even compared to the original film. Now I'm sure there are already people who are saying, "Randy, you're such a movie snob, why can't you just turn off your brain and enjoy something for once?" Not every story has to be a fantastic work of art like Battlestar Galactica or Lord of the Rings to be considered good, and I completely agree with that sentiment. I love stories that are just aiming to be fun and wholesome entertainment. It's also why I love Top Gun Maverick, because in my opinion, it embodies everything that makes a good blockbuster, with very few of the drawbacks those type of movies have. I was planning on making a simple movie review breaking down all of Avatar 2's plot holes, contrivances, and broken world building, which I'm still going to do in this video, but overall, I'd say my biggest issue with this movie is that nearly everything it set out to do was executed far better in Top Gun Maverick. I wouldn't call either of them flawless masterpieces or offensive garbage, but between the two of them, I know which one I would pick if I was ever in the mood to watch a fun action flick that didn't have the most intricate plot and characters, but still developed them enough to be engaged with what was going on and appreciate the emotional payoffs by the end. Spoilers abound for both movies, though judging from their box office records, I think it's safe to assume most people have seen them by now. Let's dive in and see what makes one a better blockbuster than the other. So what exactly is a blockbuster, you may ask? To put it simply, they're big-budget movies whose main selling points are the spectacle, charismatic lead characters, and a straightforward plot any general audience can understand without being fans of the genre. Two of the earliest and arguably most famous examples would be the first Star Wars and James Bond movies, with both movies building their framework around a simple premise, like a secret agent stopping a master supervillain from nuking the world, or a farm boy going off on an adventure to save a princess from an evil galactic empire. Their main goal is to entertain the audience with all the exotic sights and thrilling action behind the premise, without getting too bogged down in all the technical and moral aspects you'd see in more serious takes on the genres, like a Tom Clancy novel or Star Trek. That's not to say they can't delve into more complex and nuanced elements, as both their sequels eventually did, but their main appeal is centered around telling fun stories rooted in universal themes, like good versus evil, and a bit of internal conflict here and there. Blockbuster movies tend to be relatively light on these aspects, so as to not break the experience for the viewer when they start questioning things, like the heroes killing numerous people across the movie's runtime, performing superhuman feats that would no doubt kill normal people, or convenient occurrences that just happen to save the main character when it seems all hope is lost. So, where do Avatar 2 and Top Gun Maverick fit in? I can confidently say they both deliver on the spectacle, but it's the other categories where Avatar 2 stumbles. Avatar 2 takes place roughly 15 or so years from the first movie, where Jake Sully has now formed a family with Neytiri and has become the de facto leader of the forest Na'vi. The plot kicks off when the humans come back and basically torch the entire area where the first movie took place. They now want to colonize Pandora, but Jake's determined to fight off his former species for the sake of his new people. This becomes complicated, however, when it turns out Quaritch, the main antagonist from the first movie, has been resurrected in a Na'vi body and is now intent on hunting him and his family down. Now by itself, that's a simple enough premise which adequately sets up why Jake and his family go on the run to hide with the Na'vi's water tribes, but it starts to fall apart when you consider the context both this movie and the first Avatar established. For starters, it doesn't make much sense for Jake to think that leaving his people will somehow make them more safe against the invading humans. Now that Jake's gone and left someone else in charge who doesn't understand the technology or attack patterns as well as he did, I doubt it'll be that hard for the humans to wipe out the native population and set up those colonies like they planned. The humans got exactly what they wanted, so at this point, there's really no reason for them to go after Jake. Granted, Quaritch is the one who's the most adamant about killing Jake, but even that doesn't make much sense when you consider what the humans' main motivation for making these colonies are.
Earth is dying. Our task here is to tame this frontier. Nothing less than to make Pandora the new home for humanity.
If the humans are here in full force as a means to save their entire species, it doesn't make much sense for them to let one of the most experienced military leaders go on a wild crusade against a couple Na'vi who aren't attacking them anymore. Sure, you could argue they'd want to eliminate Jake Sully to ensure he never leads another resistance against them, but if that's the case, Courage should be putting down all the Na'vi directly attacking them before going off to find one man who'd rather hide than fight. I wouldn't have questioned it if Courage had just gone rogue to get revenge, but later on we see he's got an entire military carrier working with him, so I guess they can spare the resources for them to go on a planet-wide manhunt. I've heard people theorize Jake left because he didn't believe they could fight off the invaders this time, which personally, I don't buy at all because he does exactly that during the opening and climax of Avatar 2, but it's unclear what the audience is supposed to think because they never bring up the Force people throughout the rest of the movie. The second big issue with Avatar 2's premise comes in the form of Courage himself. Bringing him back kind of undermines Jake's entire arc in the first movie, where he solidified his place fighting alongside the Na'vi when he killed him with Neytiri, but it's the mechanics behind his resurrection that ends up creating one of Avatar 2's biggest plot holes and broken pieces of world building. We're shown that Courage created a scan of all his memories and personality to be put in cold storage and downloaded into an avatar body in the event he died. All of this is pretty convenient by itself, especially when nobody ever mentioned this when Grace was dying in the first movie, but if humans can just create scans of themselves to put into avatar bodies, then that would mean the Na'vi can't ever win. Anyone who's seen my past videos probably knows how much I love Battlestar Galactica, so I'll let number 6 herself explain the exact conundrum the Na'vi are faced with now.
Gaius, I can't die. When this body is destroyed, my memory, my consciousness will be transmitted to a new one. I'll just wake up somewhere else in an identical body.
That's right, just like with the Cylons, our heroes are now faced with an enemy that's virtually immortal. I get that James Cameron did this just to bring back a fan-favorite character, but in doing so, he's removed the stakes of every subsequent battle Jake and Courage have, because no matter what happens, Courage can't die. Now that he's established that humans have this technology, what's stopping them from sending an army of Courages to go after the Na'vi in Avatar 3? It's a last-minute Deus Ex Machina that ends up creating massive holes in the narrative, because just like with the hyperspace kamikaze in The Last Jedi, any audience member who realizes this is now going to be left wondering why the humans don't just endlessly create Avatar clones to go to war for them. Maybe you could argue it would strain their resources, but considering they have the ability to create endless gunships, mech suits, and giant sea carriers, I don't see why they wouldn't weigh investing in a clone army, especially when it's literally the cure for death. It gets even more ridiculous because the entire movie's plot revolves around humans hunting space whales, so they can harvest their brain juice to stop their bodies from aging, despite already being able to create artificial bodies with working nervous and reproductive systems they can just download themselves into. Surely, making human bodies couldn't be that difficult if they can do that for the Na'vi. And even then, if humanity's main goal is to move to Pandora to live on permanently, I'm fairly certain most people will make the sacrifice to move into alien bodies, so they can breathe and function normally on Pandora's toxic atmosphere. All of this could have been avoided if James Cameron hadn't invented this contrived loophole to bring back Courage, but then again, A1 did the same thing to bring back Jake Sully at the end of the first movie, so who knows, maybe he'll establish they can do the same thing for their people too. I'm sure a lot of this must sound like needless nitpicking, but I'd argue a story that takes itself as seriously as Avatar 2 shouldn't have so many obvious caveats an audience has to ignore just to enjoy it. It's one thing to promote simple themes of environmentalism or family in your big budget movie, but Avatar 2 insists on droning on about them like it's trying to make a serious point, despite its story having far less depth than the average Star Trek episode. Say what you want about Transformers and Fast and Furious, but they at least didn't have those shallow messages take up more time than the action people came to see. This is where Top Gun Maverick excels by building off the first movie's plot and characters in meaningful ways, while also maintaining serious drama and fun action throughout. It's all built around a simple plot where Pete Mitchell, aka Maverick, has to train the best of Top Gun to pull off a miraculous maneuver against an opposing nation, while grappling with the fear he may lose them all, including Rooster, his deceased best friend's son he swore to look out for. Now, Top Gun Maverick's plot isn't groundbreaking by any stretch either, but unlike Avatar 2, its simplicity works to its benefit. Since all the characters and goals are kept relatively straightforward, it allows the narrative's strongest aspects to stand out better, that being the growing team dynamic between our ragtag group of pilots, and Maverick and Rooster learning to reconcile over their past grievances. Even though the story's central focus is to show hotshot pilots pulling off death-defying stunts, Their tense relationship adds dramatic weight to each scene, on top of the thrills and nail-biting suspense.
What's past is past, for both of us.
You'd like to believe that, wouldn't you?
Now you got it, don't think, just do.
Come on, Rooster, you got him. Drop down and take the shot.
Too late, you had your chance. That's a kill. Not enough.
Damn it.
Avatar 2 tries to be as straightforward, which isn't bad in itself, but its expansive setting and the deeper messages it tries to push don't lend themselves well to a jumbled story that wants to be taken seriously, but also wants its audience to ignore massive plot holes that contrives writing at the same time. It wants to have it both ways, but the Na'vi and human conflict is just too underdeveloped to be as captivating as, say, the deep resentment all Bajorans feel towards Cardassians over conquering and ravaging their homeworld in Deep Space Nine, or even the lingering animosity some humans feel towards Turians for being the only alien race to have defeated them in Mass Effect. At the same time, there aren't enough interesting aspects about the setting or characters to just enjoy at face value. If Avatar was structured more like Starship Troopers or The Fifth Element, where the main selling points were the outlandish technology, alien designs, and over-the-top yet endearing characters, none of the logistical issues I mentioned would be that big of a deal. Unfortunately, the characters are another area where Avatar 2 drops the ball. Not as bad as the Disney trilogy or Rings of Power, mind you, but they could have been so much more. To be perfectly honest, I wouldn't call any character from either Avatar 2 or Top Gun Maverick layered or complex. That would be a detriment to most stories, but for an action blockbuster, having characters that are mainly defined by simple goals, believable motivations, and engaging personalities work better for a story that's focused more on building thrilling set pieces over interpersonal drama. Indiana Jones and Ethan Hunt aren't very complex either, but they fit well in their respective stories because their main focus is showing them getting embroiled in dangerous situations, stealing prized items, and outsmarting the villains holding their loved ones ransom. Sure, there are scenes that explore their deeper flaws, like Indiana realizing his reckless obsessions end up hurting the people around him and can lead to his own death if he isn't careful, as well as Ethan questioning whether saving millions of lives over one life is either noble or callous. But what's brilliant about both those movies is that their actions not only drive the story forward, it helps show the audience who they are as people. A truck chase to stop Nazis from stealing the Ark of the Covenant, and a spy scaling the tallest building in the world are thrilling to watch by themselves, and become much more impactful because now the audience knows just how far Ethan and Indy are willing to go to get what they want and to protect the people they care about. Top Gun Maverick's characters work on a similar philosophy. Since the main conflict is all about determining who's the best to go on the mission, it kills two birds with one stone, using the spectacular flying sequences to show up how skilled the characters are, and testing their resolve to see just how far they'll go to attain that goal. That's what helps endear the audience to these characters, especially Maverick and Rooster, since they get pushed the hardest with these two ideals, and every major development in the plot and the stakes is centered around them.
We are not gonna make it. Just trust me. Maintain your speed. We can make it.
Why are you dead?
You don't know that.
You're not flying fast enough. You don't have a second to waste.
Yeah, we'd still have a chance.
In an F-18.
It's not the plane, sir. It's the pilot.
Exactly.
Admiral Simpson and Penny may not have much to them beyond just being the hard-ass authority figure and love interest respectively, but their interactions with Maverick are what drive him to work harder to build up his team, and reveal why he pushes all of them so hard, especially Rooster. The same dynamic plays out between Rooster, Phoenix, and Hangman, with the latter two serving as his moral support and arch-rival in turn, that push him to work harder than everyone around him in order to prove his capabilities to Maverick. Like I said, I wouldn't call most of these characters as complex as a single paratrooper from Band of Brothers, but that's not what Top Gun Maverick's trying to be. As much as I personally love stories that explore complex characters and multifaceted relationships, Top Gun's focus has always been showcasing larger-than-life hotshot pilots pulling off death-defying stunts as they work together to defeat an unambiguously evil force, and always end with the day being saved, bitter rivals earning a newfound respect for one another, and the main character riding off into the sunset with the girl of their dreams tucked beneath their arms. That's the core appeal behind a good blockbuster, depicting fantastical worlds, idealized characters, and thrilling set pieces beyond imagination, to serve as pure escapism for the mundane or harsh realities people contend with every day. So with all that in mind, why does Avatar 2 fall short in comparison to Top Gun Maverick, you may ask? Well, to put it simply, every character in Avatar 2 is a shallow archetype, with scarcely anything that makes them layered or even distinct from one another. When I say distinct, I literally mean I was having trouble even remembering the names of Jake's children, which is insane when you consider the entire second act is all about them trying to integrate into the Water Tribe and get us invested in them before the big climactic battle at the end. Jake, Neytiri, and Korch fare slightly better, but that's only because they were characters in the first movie, and even then, there isn't much to their personalities beyond their roles as the noble protagonist, the warrior mom love interest, and evil villain who would twirl his mustache if he still had one. I've always thought Jake Sully was a bland and forgettable character, even though he had a nice arc of finding his true place with the Na'vi people after learning to use his legs again and bonding with Neytiri, but all he does in Avatar 2 is be the strict but well-meaning father and the reluctant leader of the Na'vi against his own species again. That's his main focus in all his scenes, and it's even worse for Neytiri, who literally does nothing except raise mild disagreements over Jake's ideas, but just goes along with them anyway until the climax. It's a shame too, considering James Cameron's track record with great female characters. But Avatar 2 forgoes exploring every potentially interesting conflict with her and many others, such as mourning the fact she abandoned the homeland she swore to protect, disliking their adopted human son Spider, who's revealed to be Coolidge's biological son this movie invented out of nowhere, and almost coming to blows with the Water Tribe for calling her family mutants. But all of that only exists to be pointless melodrama to spice up a few scenes, and never gets mentioned again. As for Coolidge, he's the same one-note bad guy from the first movie, and would be completely unremarkable without Stevie Lang hamming up his performance. The movie could have explored an interesting story about him coming to grips with the fact he's a clone, trapped inside the body of one of the aliens he hates so much, which would have been a clever inversion of Jake's arc from the first Avatar, but he's just the sadistic villain again who's obsessed with Jake, and barely shows any kind of grief or resentment over the fact he's no longer human. The only semi-interesting plot point he has is the time he spends with Spider, which leads to him sparing the life of one of Jake's kids in exchange for Neytiri not killing his son. I say semi-interesting because it's the first action he's taken across both movies that prove he's got some level of depth to him, but the big problem is it comes completely out of nowhere. It would have made sense if they actually formed some level of attachment to each other, but Coolidge treats Spider like his hostage translator. Maybe you could argue he draws the line at getting a human child killed, but aside from that, their bond doesn't evolve beyond prisoner and parole officer. It's not a case of him being a stern father figure who acts like an asshole on the surface, but cares deep down, as you would see in overrated first-party Sony exclusives. No, Spider is effectively Coolidge's tool and hostage for most of the movie, forcing him to translate his threats to the terrified Na'vi villagers, and making him watch all of his cruel acts towards the people he's grown to see as his true family.
They don't know anything.
Shoot that animal.
What the hell are you doing? Hey, what are you doing? Stop! Stop! Don't hurt them!
Get back to the bridge. Keep them there.
I'm going. No, don't hurt her, okay? Don't.
Stand there. Don't move. Not a step.
The most ridiculous part of this entire plotline comes at the very end, when Coolidge tries to convince Spider to come with him. I mean, what is this? Reverse Stockholm Syndrome? I'd honestly be shocked if Spider didn't suffer from long-term trauma after everything he's experienced with both Coolidge and the other humans. But is sparing his life after everything else he's done supposed to make up for all of that? I've seen people online draw parallels between Coolidge's story and Darth Vader's, which isn't too far-fetched since they're both tyrannical enforcers for two spacefaring fascist militaries that look down on aliens, and they both have sons on the enemy side they want to convert to their cause. I'm guessing James Cameron introduced Spider so Coolidge can have a similar redemption story, but he hasn't got it off to a good start so far. Yes, Darth Vader chopped off Luke's hand and tortured his friends, but he also showed he valued him as a son, not a bargaining chip or a useful prisoner. It was that deep familial bond that drove him to betray his master and save Luke's life at the cost of his own. Meanwhile, Coolidge shows no regard for Spider's well-being outside of the interrogation scene and the standoff with Neytiri, and even then, you could easily write off both of those noble acts as him just not wanting to lose a valuable asset, based on how he treats Spider throughout the rest of the movie, not because he actually cares about him. It just comes across as the same annoying trend many modern stories fall into, where audiences are meant to sympathize with characters who are shown to be ruthless sociopaths for most of a narrative. only for the writers to pull out a tragic backstory or bullshit excuse for their terrible deeds out of nowhere, in a vain attempt to make them look complex, but only succeeding in making them look like stupid and detestable hypocrites. Coolidge isn't the worst example of this I've seen, but everything surrounding his character and his role in this story just screams of missed opportunities. All the glaring issues with this thin characterization comes to a head with Jake's children, who are meant to be the catalyst for some of Avatar 2's most impactful scenes, but completely fall short when I can sum up their entire personalities in just one sentence each. Neteyam's the eldest son who's the best at being a soldier and always follows his dad's orders. Nowak's the bumbling middle child who always wants to prove himself, but is better at talking to fish than actually fighting. Kiri's autistic Aowa Jesus, who's clearly meant to play a bigger role in future movies, but her only defining traits in this movie is being played by Sigourney Weaver, and wondering who fathered her from Grace's dead avatar. Spider's the precocious wild child who often butts heads with his brothers, but still loves them regardless. And Took's the youngest, who's just there to look cute and constantly get kidnapped to drive the plot. Seriously, this happens so often that even she complains about it towards the end.
We can still get this done.
Hell yeah.
I can't believe you signed up again.
Now these aren't terrible characters like Galadriel from Rings of Power, or even as annoying as Leia from the Kenobi series. Aside from a few lines that clearly show an older man who has no idea how kids talk wrote them, they were likable enough. And I'd go as far as saying Nowak, Kiri, and Spider could have been interesting if they were developed properly. Instead, the movie spends over an hour reiterating the same details about them over and over again, and is more interested in showing them being wayward kids who don't fit in or plot devices, rather than letting them have any insightful conversations with their father, their mother, or even each other. Yes, we've already established Nowak feels like a disappointment because he can't fight as well as his older brother. We don't need to see over a dozen scenes of him telling everyone that very thing, or have him go off on his own numerous times so he can get into trouble and have Jake be mad at him again. The most frustrating part is, there are several moments where it looks like he's going to have a heart-to-heart with either Neteyam or Jake, but they all amount to them saying the most generic things to each other like, I'm your father, and I'm tough on you because I actually care deep down, or I'm your older brother, and I always look out for you, and that's it. It's the same case with Spider, who spends the entire movie telling dumb wisecracks and repeating how much he hates his dad, usually to his face. It's such a missed opportunity to not have him ask about his heritage, or explore the reason why he loves the Na'vi over his own kind. It could be just as simple as him telling Coolidge he thinks they're all a bunch of irresponsible assholes who just love torching things, and don't respect life they think is beneath them. That would have laid some groundwork for a potentially interesting internal conflict for him going forward. But no, Spider just spends the entire time either being silent or jumping around like a wild dog. The only notable thing he does in this entire movie is save Coolidge's life at the end, but even that doesn't really matter since they can just clone him into another body. And then we have Kiri, who was easily the most interesting character of the entire cast, due to her ability to feel and eventually manipulate all the living things on Pandora around her. So, how does Avatar 2 go about exploring this fascinating connection?
So what does Aowa's heartbeat sound like?
Mighty.
Yep, that's what I expected at this point. I'd like to think if I was hooked up to a living planet, I'd have more to say about it than just it being mighty. I will say her connection to Aowa does have potential to become a more layered conflict going forward, but in this movie, she only serves to be a deus ex machina and little else. Since I'm already breaking down characters, I might as well go over Payakan, the Tukun or space whale that saves Nowak's life and becomes his buddy. Despite having the same level of sentience as a human being, there isn't much to say other than he's a giant alien whale who saves Nowak because the other Wanna Tribe boys left him to die, which gets completely glossed over in the most contrived way possible, I might add, and lives as an outcast because he chose to fight back against the humans capturing them, which the other whales and the Na'vi see as sacrilege, even though that's what every intelligent life form does when its life is threatened.
But they came to believe that killing, no matter how justified, only brings more killing. Payakan is a killer, so he's outcast.
I thought the movie would at least do some kind of parallel arc between Nowak and the whale. Like being an outcast is okay as long as you stay true to yourself and not follow some ridiculous traditions or whatever. But no, he's just there to pose for the trailer, show off how nice the CGI looks, and save the day in the end, because apparently, all the whales would rather let themselves die than fight off the human ships they could easily crush if they offered some level of resistance. I wish I were making that last part up. As I said before, having simplistic characters doesn't automatically ruin a story, but when a story uses cliché and honestly manipulative tactics to get you invested in them and the one-sided conflict, it makes the experience more frustrating than enjoyable. The two scenes that best showcase this are the whale hunting and Tatum's death, both of which are entirely built around the two easiest methods to make an audience feel bad, but provide no deeper context to be invested in them otherwise, which also makes the overarching messages they push ring hollow. In other words, Avatar 2 depends on people feeling bad over seeing helpless animals and a teenage boy getting killed, so they can root for our bland, poorly established heroes to take down the caricature villains. I'm not saying these scenes don't have any emotional impact, but my big issue is that the movie didn't earn it. It spent more time showing off their impressive animation and reiterating over and over how beloved they are by everyone around them, without contextualizing why the audience should care about them as individuals.
Dad, you gotta get up. Dad. She was my spirit sister. She was the composer of songs. What is this?
Forgive me. I have failed you all. No, boy. You have kept your honor. I would have followed you, my brother. My captain. My king. I want to go home. It's okay, it's okay. Dad.
Oh, my son!
It wouldn't be so glaring if Avatar 2 didn't linger so long on them, but it's clear from the overdramatic music and heart-wrenching performances that it wants people to feel bad about these deaths, despite giving Tatum and the whales the same level of characterization as the average drunken bimbo in a slasher flick. I'm not saying blockbuster movies can't have gut-wrenching scenes, but they should at least be focused on characters the audience has been given some reason to care about, beyond them just being a cutesy animal or a kid's sidekick. Case in point, Iceman's death in Top Gun Maverick. Even though he only appears on screen once across the entire movie, his bond with Maverick plays a major role in the story and in his development. From the beginning, it's established that Maverick's been on thin ice with the military for years, and it's only because of Iceman's authority as an admiral that he hasn't been dishonorably discharged numerous times. This bond helps kickstart the plot, since he's the one who put Maverick in charge of training the Top Gun students to fly the mission, a post he never would have gotten on his own, and one he would have flat out refused if he knew Rooster was one of the candidates.
With all due respect, sir, I'm not a teacher.
You were a Top Gun instructor before.
That was almost 30 years ago. I lasted 2 months.
Well, then let me be perfectly blunt. You were here at the request of Admiral Kazansky. Now, Iceman happens to be a man I deeply admire, and he seems to think that you have something left to offer the Navy. You fly for Top Gun, or you don't fly for the Navy ever again.
From then on, Iceman encourages Maverick through text to move on from his past, serving as an unseen mentor that pushes Maverick to bury the hatchet with Rooster in order to prepare him for what needs to be done for the mission. This comes to a head at the halfway point when Iceman insists on seeing Maverick before he succumbs to his cancer diagnosis. One of the brilliant parts about this scene is that even though it goes over the same conflict Maverick's been dealing with since the beginning of this movie, it gives someone who's typically a man of action the chance to express just how much he's struggling with the weight of his responsibilities, both as an instructor and the person Rooster's parents entrusted to look out for their son. The fact that Iceman's the only person he's told all of this shows how deep their friendship and trust goes, which is especially meaningful for anyone who's seen the first Top Gun and knows how adversarial they used to be to one another. Maverick believes it's too late to make amends, but Iceman points out as long as he's still breathing and has the drive to do something, the Maverick he knows can do just about anything, and Rooster needs that Maverick to teach him how to fight his mission and come out the other side in one piece.
The kid needs Maverick. That's why I fought for you.
Thank you, Ice.
One last thing. Who's the better pilot? You or me?
This is a nice moment. Let's not ruin it.
This becomes the last exchange they have with one another before he passes away. And these words take on a whole new meaning when Maverick realizes the only way he can complete the mission and get Rooster out alive is to show he can fly this mission as team leader and make Rooster his wingman. In pure ostentatious and insubordinate fashion, of course. And there you have it. A simple but effective character death that doesn't bring down the light, adventurous tone Top Gun Maverick's going for, but also serves to motivate the protagonists on their arcs and make the audience understand the weight of their loss without being too heavy-handed about it. That's the key behind making the death of a side character impactful, by clearly defining their relationship to the protagonist and what their loss means for them and the narrative going forward, instead of overloading the audience with a tragic backstory or copious amounts of screen time where they do nothing of consequence until their actual death. I wouldn't say Top Gun Maverick's the best example of this philosophy, but it does execute it well by ensuring all of its characters contribute something towards pushing its leads, Maverick and Rooster, further along in their arcs. Meanwhile, you could cut out more than half of Avatar 2's expansive cast, and little to nothing would change in the actual story, since they don't have a major impact on Jake, Korg, Kiri, Spider, and arguably Loak, the ones who actually affect the plot going forward, and aren't memorable or interesting by themselves either. Now some of you may be wondering, why am I harping on about story and characters so much, when both of these movies are mainly focused on delivering high-octane action? Well, let's talk about it. For all of Avatar 2 and Top Gun Maverick's shortcomings in the writing, neither movie is a letdown when it comes to the action. I'll even say when it comes to variety, Avatar 2 has Top Gun Maverick beat, between shootouts, chase scenes, and a full-out bare-knuckle brawl on a sinking ship. Both movies have thrilling and memorable set pieces that far outclass practically every major superhero project from the last 3 years easily, which I suppose you could also chalk up to their crews being treated far better than anyone who works for Disney these days. With all that being said, if I had to pick which movie kept me on the edge of my seat throughout most of its tense scenes, that crown would have to go to Top Gun Maverick. Admittedly, I'm a little biased on this front because I'm a sucker for movies that favor practical stunts over extravagant CGI, and Top Gun delivers on the former in spades. That's not to say Avatar 2's action is poorly crafted or inherently inferior just because it's all CGI, but watching people pulling off death-defying maneuvers in real jets was just more thrilling to me than watching a well-made cutscene. It also didn't help that many of Avatar 2's fight scenes were built on contrived setups, like Jake rescuing his kidnapped children for the umpteenth time, characters walking into obvious traps, or the humans do something incredibly stupid that makes it easy for the Na'vi to take them out with no hassle. I would still say it's enjoyable in the same vein as a Godzilla or Transformers movie, where the main appeal is just watching gratuitous explosions and people firing useless bullets at each other. To be fair, Top Gun Maverick only has one big action scene at the climax, but I'd say it's well earned given it's the mission the characters have been training for over the course of the movie, not to mention it's the culmination of Maverick and Rooster's arcs where they finally learn to work together. I'm sure some military veteran out there could point out a way the mission in Top Gun Maverick could have been done without old-fashioned jets, but I can still buy into the premise for the story because it clearly explains the logic behind that plan, and builds a fun narrative with likable characters off of it. As long as a blockbuster story does that much, on top of remaining entirely consistent with the rules and logic the writer establishes for that world, an audience can buy into anything like space monks who can use telekinesis, a super spy scaling the tallest building in the world with magnetic gloves, or a magic ring that can lead to the end of the world if it ever fell back into the hands of the Dark Lord who created it. Avatar 2, on the other hand, stumbles the most in this regard because it suffers from two prevailing issues that have been around since the beginning of this series. Who exactly are the heroes supposed to be, and why should the audience care about them? The movie goes to extreme lengths to make the Na'vi look like sweet, innocent tribespeople who all love each other and the planet, whereas almost every human is an unrelenting asshole who cares about nothing but earning money and killing everything around them. But there are several plot points that contradict this and make the morality of the characters very suspect. For example, we know that humans came to Pandora in the first movie because they needed unobtainium, which is still one of the dumbest names for a resource I've heard in any story, because Earth is now an overpopulated and barren world, similar to Megacity 1 in Dread, or Los Angeles in Blade Runner. We know the Avatar program was started because the RDA wanted to communicate and eventually negotiate a peace deal with the Na'vi to mine resources from their planet. The humans didn't realize that every tree and animal they bulldozed to get to those vast unobtainium reserves were all connected to Iowa, which is why Jake and Grace sided with the Na'vi. Yes, the humans are at fault for giving up on diplomacy and resorting to wiping out all life on Pandora's surface. But are we really supposed to be rooting for Jake Sully and the Na'vi, essentially trying to sabotage their efforts to save humanity from going totally extinct? The first action scene in the movie is Jake attacking a supply train, and judging from the gunship patrol overhead, they're desperately trying to protect those resources. Earlier in this video, I took issue with the humans' obsession with hunting Jake over any efforts to preserve their species, but given how many people and equipment they've lost across both these movies, I'd say they have every reason to abandon any notion of coexistence or diplomacy and declare full-scale war against all the Na'vi tribes. Hell, they should seriously consider a strategy from another James Cameron movie that happens to star Sigourney Weaver, featuring humans fighting a dangerous alien species that wants them all dead.
I say we take off and nuke the entire site from orbit. It's the only way to be sure.
Don't get me wrong, I'm not rooting for the humans here, and you could absolutely write a story where they're the villains from the aliens' perspective, such as in Halo Contact Harvest, but I don't see how it makes the Na'vi look good by condemning them to their fate. Granted, the humans would have been smarter putting their resources towards building a space station or colonizing the moon instead, considering they can't even breathe Pandora's atmosphere naturally, so I can't say I feel bad for them making so many costly, idiotic decisions. Then we have the Water Tribe Na'vi, who didn't have any interest in stopping the humans from ravaging their planet or killing the space whales they love so much until it directly affected them. Hell, they weren't even willing to take in Jake and his family at first, even though he's the one who drove off the humans in the first place. Yes, him being there puts them all at risk, but as we saw with the evil Aussie captain, his lands were already being targeted because the humans wanted to harvest immortal brain juice. Now ask yourselves, how much do these people actually care about these whales, considering so many of them were getting harvested down south, according to Paya Khan's memories, but didn't retaliate until they came into their territory? So how does any of this impact the action, you may ask? Well, good action is built on two things: solid choreography and compelling stakes. Compelling stakes comes from investment in either the characters or the world and ideals they're fighting for. It doesn't have to be elaborate or incredibly complex, but the motivations and objectives of both sides should be clear enough for the audience to determine which side to root for and root against. The Galactic Empire kills innocent people, blows up planets, and is run by the incarnation of Satan himself, so naturally an audience is going to root for the rebels fighting to bring them down. However, the humans in Avatar 2 are motivated to save their planet and their species, not dominate the entire galaxy. That doesn't make the Na'vi preventing them from accomplishing those goals look sympathetic at all. Not to mention their isolationist, survival to the fittest mentality is more reminiscent of the Harfoots than the Rebel Alliance. I wouldn't mind if that was the intention. Hell, it would even be interesting if Jake was conflicted between both sides, but it's clear the Na'vi are meant to be the unambiguous heroes, despite all of their cold-blooded and selfish actions. Therefore, when I'm watching all these fancy action scenes of them slaughtering dozens of humans, I'm not thinking, oh wow, that was amazing. I'm wondering how many of these soldiers had friends and family back on Earth who desperately needed those resources, and how many of them would end up dying thanks to Jake and his pals for slaughtering all the people trying to save them. Top Gun Maverick made the smart choice by not mentioning anything about the enemy besides they have illegal nukes, making it much easier to root for Maverick and his team to take them out, and enjoy all the thrilling action for what it was.
Come on, Beth, come on! One last chance. You can do this! Yes! Splash 2!
Earth is dying. Our task here is to tame this frontier.
Both Top Gun Maverick and Avatar 2 are more focused on the spectacle surrounding the action scenes, over fleshing out the deeper motivations of both the heroes and the villains. They deliberately make their central conflicts as transparently good versus evil as possible, so the audience can easily root for the heroes taking out large numbers of the villains' forces with impunity. Many of the most effective blockbuster stories tend to keep their antagonists within the bounds of stormtroopers, orcs, terrorists, Nazis, or undefined foreign nations, so the audience is more invested in our charismatic heroes taking them down, rather than the morals or ethics behind defeating the villains and their henchmen. You could argue that Top Gun Maverick made its villains a little too thin, but that's also true for many classic 80s action flicks. And just like with Commando, Predator, or the original Top Gun, it relies on its likable characters and over-the-top action to make up for that shortcoming. While Avatar 2's action is engaging when taken at face value, the backwards morals of the Na'vi and the humans' oddly sympathetic goals makes the former look like terrible hypocrites and leaves you wondering if James Cameron has some kind of anti-human agenda, given how much he glorifies the latter being gruesomely slaughtered. That doesn't necessarily make its action scenes bad, but it does make them less engaging due to the shallow premise and flat characters carrying them. Even if Avatar was entirely live action and shot just like Top Gun, those factors are what make it feel like a hollow, pre-rendered cutscene more than anything else. I'm sure this video must come across like I hate Avatar 2, but that isn't the case. As a massive science fiction fan and a fan of James Cameron's previous movies, I wanted to like the Avatar series, or at least enjoy them as popcorn blockbusters like Top Gun Maverick, where my biggest concern was getting good action, engaging characters, and a few poignant themes here and there. I'll even go as far as saying I liked Avatar 2 over anything I've seen from Marvel and DC in the last 3 years, and hope its success leads to us getting more mainstream science fiction and fantasy properties over worn-out cape shit. With all that being said, the last thing I want is more movies being made just like Avatar 2, creating grand stories that are actually as deep as a puddle, relying on shallow archetypes to carry emotional scenes instead of creating likable characters, and trying to be both schlocky and meaningful without doing either all that well. Stories come in many varieties: action, romance, horror, drama, comedy, and they can even combine all of these genres into one. It's the writer's job to ensure they actually fit together and don't conflict with each other, as well as the central focus of the narrative. Indiana Jones is just about a charismatic treasure hunter finding mystical artifacts, who also gets a new love interest in every movie, so questioning the logistics behind how he can afford all these expeditions across the world on a teacher's salary isn't that important. Mission Impossible is literally all about Ethan Hunt doing the impossible. So as long as the movie delivers on that, along with having him work alongside Ving Rhames and Simon Pegg, I can easily write off Ethan as a cyborg with an adamantium skeleton to explain how he survives all these insane scenarios. I can also appreciate the more intimate scenes between Indy and Marion, or Ethan and Julia, because both movies took the time to establish them as compelling people with strong convictions, while also maintaining the lighthearted, adventurous tones. That's what the best blockbuster movies like the original Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, and Top Gun Maverick accomplished. And it's what Avatar is capable of once it gets its world building and characters in order. Until then, I can't say it's a story I'll revisit anytime soon, unlike the latter three. Thanks for watching. I was working on a TV show recommendation before this video, but decided to push forward with this before the Oscars dropped, since I saw Avatar 2 and Top Gun Maverick were nominated for Best Picture and wanted to talk about them at length. I realize I've been a little lackadaisical when it comes to video updates on my Twitter page, so rest assured, when I finish recording the next video, I'll be sure to post about it. Anyway, I'm the Elusive Eye. Until next time.